Hello and welcome to another episode of Yarn to Table. I'm Celeste and this is a show about my knitting life. Welcome back and welcome for the first time if you've never watched before. You should know a couple things about how I run things here. So I'm not going to have a lot of detailed notes about patterns and yarn and anything like that in the doobly-doo. What I will have is a link to my Ravelry page where I have up-to-date project pages for everything that you may see, and you can see all the details, needle size, patterns, yarn, everything there. You'll also find from my blogs tab on my Ravelry page that you can link to all the relevant episodes of this show for each pattern. So to speak, if you're on a project page and you want to know more about that project, click blogs and it'll bring up the links to every episode where I talked about it, and then you can go from there. I also share a lot on Instagram, so on both Instagram and Ravelry, I am Celeste Full, and I am 2 weeks away from my due date right now. So I will be sharing a couple cute baby knits with you today, as well as some other things that I've been making for myself. And I also wanted to do an announcement about vlogmas right up front. I've done vlogmas for the last 2 years and I really enjoy it, not just for being in that community and seeing other people's videos and having people sort of follow along with me day to day, but also just as a record of my life during the Christmas season. You know, it's so neat to look a few years back and when I had a different job and different things going on, and to kind of compare the years. And because this year is so momentous, our baby is due on December 7th, I really don't want to miss out on having that sort of record of this special time. However, at the same time, I know that I have no idea what exactly the experience is going to be like, my recovery, taking care of a newborn, and I don't know exactly what my limitations are going to look like. So my plan right now is that I'm going to at least vlog until I can't anymore. So it may be a few days or a week at the beginning, and then I may completely disappear with just a little Instagram announcement that the baby's here. I may disappear for a few days or a week or a few weeks and then come back at the end of December if I'm more able to vlog again. Or it's possible that my disappearance could be really short, or it could just be like, you know, maybe a couple days of delays on uploads, you know, no idea. I think it's quite possible that I'll entirely disappear, and I'm sure you guys will understand. But I didn't want to just cut it and say I'm not going to do it this year at all, because I really want to. So that's the plan. So that is when you will see me next, is on December 1st. And then we'll see when we can get back to regular programming, depending on how things go. I am going to be taking 4 months of maternity leave, so hopefully I will have some time to knit and some time to record and things like that eventually, once we settle into a routine of sorts of new motherhood. So, is there anything else I want to make sure to say? I guess that is it. Yeah, so let me show you what I've been working on. I will start with my finished objects. I have a couple baby knits that I finished. The first one is this adorable little dress. This is called the Pippa dress, and you can find it on my Ravelry projects page, as I mentioned. Has this little button closure in the back to get it over baby's big head. Nice little eyelet detail here and here at the waist as well. And then this beautiful lace. This is Ryan's favorite thing that I've ever knit. He is completely obsessed with it. He thinks it's so sweet. And I made this on almost a bit of a whim. I had this yarn, this is the Phoebe, the Quince & Co. Phoebe. I had purchased it for a sort of all over cabled baby, almost overall pattern that, although still on Ravelry, is not actually available, which I didn't notice because that's super weird. And I, reached out to the pattern designer and even people who had made the pattern before, and trying to find out anything I could about getting the pattern, and I never heard from anyone. So I had to give up on that, even though I really liked that pattern. And then I was left with a skein of DK weight in a lovely color. This is like almost a grayish lavender sort of mauve color. It's called, I think, Cygnus or Signet, something like that, something that means swan or comes from that root word. And in the photo, it looks more like a dusty pink. But in person, I think it's more of a dusky lavender, although possibly that could just be the stylet. But it's a beautiful color, it's a beautiful yarn, and it was really just enough for a baby knit. I'm not a huge hat or accessories knitter, and the idea that I would be able to find something else I really wanted to make with one skein of DK was pretty unlikely, so I knew that I wanted to find another baby item to make with this, and this was just absolutely perfect. The hiccup is ultimately I did not have quite enough yarn. I found myself in probably the most intense game of yarn chicken of my life. I did lose, but ultimately I think I won because it's still beautiful. What happened, I believe, is that when I looked at the yardage requirements, I was looking at the newborn size, and then I decided to make the 0 to 3 months size, which was the second size. And didn't notice that it was just required slightly more yardage. There were some varying things on the yardage based on whether you wanted to do cap sleeves, as I've done, or short sleeves or long sleeves, and then there was also the different sizes, and I guess at some point I just thought I was looking at the first size because I'm making it for a brand new baby, but obviously I'd actually done the calculation in my head that I wanted to make 0 to 3 months, which is a little bit more practical. So anyway, what I discovered as I was knitting down this skirt is that I was starting to look and go, I feel like I'm not going to have enough yarn. Then I looked it up and I saw what mistake I had made. First, I eliminated a few repeats of these eyelets coming down. And I had to do that by ripping back and continuing on. Then I made it like at least halfway through the lace chart and realized I was doing something wrong with the lace chart because, and I will warn you, I don't think this pattern is very well written in terms of being easy to understand. The chart, for example, did not chart every row. It only charted the odd rows where you were doing something. So I thought it was true lace, meaning you don't have these, plain knit rounds in between, the rounds where you're doing yarn overs and stuff. And I was knitting it to that going, this doesn't make any sense, only to discover that they had just left out the in-between rows, and the note where it told you that was like somewhere that you never would have thought to look. So just not a super user-friendly pattern. So I ripped out first to eliminate some of the eyelets. Then I screwed up the lace pattern and I had to rip back. Then as I continued the lace pattern, I thought I could tell that the yarn chicken was real, and I still needed to come and pick up just to knit a few rounds and bind off these sleeves. So what I did at one point, I did have my yarn cut into two, and I'm trying to remember why that was. I don't think I had a knot. Anyway, for some reason I had a cut in my yarn anyway, so I had like a smaller section of my yarn, and I decided I just sort of left this, and I came up here with different needles and I used it to finish the sleeves, so that I knew all the yarn I would need would be to finish the skirt, and came back down here, and what I ended up eliminating was maybe 1 or 2 rows at the bottom of the lace, and then an additional eyelet, which is maybe, I think, 5 rows, which would have matched here and here. If I had had all the yarn I needed, I might have even added an eyelet to the cap sleeves, although on second thought, I think that might be too much. But I definitely was supposed to have the eyelet here, and I just didn't have the yarn for it. So what I ended up having is the skirt is a little shorter by maybe a half to a full inch, and I don't think you really miss the final couple rows of the lace, but you don't get that cute eyelet. So not perfect, but ultimately, if you don't know, then you don't notice, because it's still super, super cute. And the length isn't that important, especially for a baby, because like her butt's gonna be out anyway, you know what I mean? Like she doesn't really need to, in fact, the shorter it is and the more it just sort of suggests a skirt, the more mobile she's gonna be, and I think it'll be perfectly fine. You will see this skirt is extremely voluminous, which is why this simple little lacy knit actually eats a lot more yarn than you would think. But there you have it. Sorry, this candle is driving me crazy. I'm gonna, just with how it's distracting from the knits I'm showing you. Okay, there you have that. And then I knit another little baby thing, and this is something really special. This is one of my very favorite baby knits that I had seen on Ravelry at least a year or two ago, and marked and sort of like knew that I wanted to make it for my baby because it was so special. And then I realized at some point, well, the thing is, I'll actually show you so I can talk about it. The thing is, as you can tell, it requires a tiny little mini skein, like tiniest little bit of all these different colors. And I'm not a big stash person, and I really wanted it to be the perfect shades. I didn't want it to feel like just a bunch of leftovers patched together. I really wanted them to all be the same base. Ultimately, what I needed for this was the yarn kit that was made for it. And I had looked, and I believe the way they have it on the website, so this is by the yarn company Underwing, which is this beautiful little black rainbow label, which you may have seen around because it is so cute. They are a French company. I had never used their yarn before, but my dear friend and brilliant knitwear designer, Melody Hoffman, is a huge fan. And so knowing that I have similar taste to her in yarn and also just really liking their logo, I kind of always wanted an excuse to order some for something. And then when I put it together that yarn was the same as the company that had designed this, I was like, well, duh, of course I want the kit. That's like definitely what I want. When I went to their website several different times over the course of my pregnancy thinking, well, maybe they'll have it now, maybe they'll have it now. They never had it in stock, and it was because there were these cute little kits where they put together the minis and the 2 larger skeins that you needed all together in a box. They didn't have those in stock, but it turned out when I looked further on the site that they did have the mini skeins sold separately from the full skeins, so you could actually compile your own kit and not have any excess yarn. I mean, it was genuinely what came in the kit. It just wasn't marked as a kit because they still had a project page for the kit that always said sold out. So I'm really glad I figured that one out. Pro tip, if you're looking for it, you don't want to go to the kit section, you want to go to the yarn section, and you can find the mini skein sets there, and hopefully they are still in stock for you if you're looking for it. I was not able to use the exact same shade of gray that was in the pattern, which I did like. I think it's the Poivre et Sel, or maybe it's Sel et Poivre. I forget. It's salt and pepper. I forget which order they say them in though, because we would say salt and pepper, but I feel like it's Poivre et Sel, which is pepper and salt. Anyway, the one that I did get is this Goland, which is actually a really similar, it's right there, it's a really similar gray. It's just slightly darker, slightly more pepper in it than the one in the picture. So not too mad about that. And I used these really sweet little coconut buttons. I wanted like a natural sort of wooden looking button as well. I basically wanted to make it exactly as it looks in the picture because it's just perfect in the picture. You know how sometimes you kind of want to go do your own thing and then other times you just want it to look exactly how it does in the pattern. This was one of those times. So these coconut buttons are really great. I got this big pack of them on Amazon, and they actually are like a dark brown on the other side. So it's sort of like having two buttons in one because, you know, when I need buttons now, I can go to that and select a light or a dark brown, which is cool. But this whole thing was just an absolute joy. It's a sport weight, 100% wool, 100% non-superwashable yarn. It is, I want to say it was like a 2-ply. I think it's a 2-ply, it might be a 3-ply. It is very, very lofty. It has that woolen spun quality that I associate with Brooklyn Tweed, Shelter, and Loft yarns. But quite honestly, one of the, probably the most delicious yarn base I can remember working with in a long time. This is exactly what I like to work with. It is, I love a woolen spun, I love a non-superwash, but I really, really also like something that is a little bit soft. And this just strikes that perfect balance. It is just genuinely really special, gorgeous yarn and worth ordering all the way from France and waiting for, because frankly, I haven't experienced anything exactly just like it from an American manufacturer. There are yarns that I love from Brooklyn Tweed and Quince & Co. that are similar, but this is really just perfect for me. I absolutely love it. And I'm wondering, I can probably find a vendor who sells it here, and I wouldn't have to wait so long if I wanted it again for another project. I should look into that. Anyway, whole thing is worked flat and from the top down, nice little yoke shaping. And then the button bands are done, picked up and done separately. And it's got this great little pocket, which is optional. Obviously, the baby does not need a pocket, but it's so cute. So, you know, that was mandatory as far as I was concerned. And then the other thing that I did that was a little different, the rainbow kit actually came with 2 more colors than you need. Is that right? Or maybe 1 more color? I think there was 1 more, and I think it might be because for the larger sizes you need an extra stripe, something like that. In the picture, there's a lighter shade of blue that they had used, and they did not use this tomato red. They just went straight from orange to pink. But the lighter blue almost disappears into the gray. And I really liked the idea of having a red stripe because why have so many shades of blue and then not as many warm tones? So I used the red instead of the lighter blue. And everything else is pretty much exactly how it looked in the picture. As I said, I just thought it was the perfect sweater. It was really enjoyable to knit. Not just because the yarn is lovely, but because, of course, just these stripes were so addictive. I sped through the yoke really quickly, and then everything else went quite fast because it is so small and lovely. It's knit at this really great tight gauge. Details on my needle size and everything are on the pattern, the project page on Ravelry. And I just really love the look of like a garter stitch detail on a stockinette project. I've just always thought that is so cute. So, 2 finished baby knits. I also finished my emergency socks. I will not talk on and on about them because I have shown them before. But these are with another favorite yarn base of mine, the Retrosaria Mondim. And this is in one of her sort of variegated microstriping colorways. For me, when I knit with the, I might have it right here. No, I don't worry about it. When I knit the socks that I knit with her red microstriping color, I got more of a true microstripe. Here, I knit a larger stitch count, and I got more of a pooling effect, as you can see. And I'm sure that's the reason why. I don't mind it. I do prefer the true microstripe look, but I think this is still really cute. It's subtle enough, the contrast in colors, that it, you know, ordinarily I'm not very into pooling, but I think here it's subtle enough that I like it. But the reason I increased my stitch count is because these are non-superwash, and the other ones were the first non-superwash socks that I made, and they have gotten a little tighter than I would prefer with wear and washing. So I figured I would try upping my stitch count for a non-superwash sock and see if that works as a better fit long term. Fish Lipska's Heel, really short little ankle socks. I made these to wear in my favorite ankle boots because I only have one other hand knit pair of shorty socks that I wear in them all the time. I mean, as long as I can get away with it, and then I have to start wearing store-bought socks because you can only wear one pair of hand knit socks and a pair of boots for a couple days before even they start to get a little smelly, and you gotta wash them. So yeah, so I'm excited to start wearing these. I kept them fresh to show you here, so I'm going to start wearing these soon. And yeah, these were like my emergency sock, my sort of on-the-go project that I would pull out for a movie or a family get-together, or, you know, now this time of year, sitting in my car in the morning waiting for it to warm up before I pull out. I've actually started keeping my emergency sock bag, my Homero Fiber Co bag, in my car all the time so that I just have it with me. And so it becomes my sort of exception to the general monogamy that I've been following all year. Because whatever project you're working on, when it's, you know, something like this, you can't really take that to the movies with you, or, you know, necessarily even knit on it at a family dinner or something like that. So now that I've finished these, I have started another pair of emergency socks, and I will move into whips with that. So my husband Ryan, who is the loveliest, most knitworthy person, really enjoys the hand knit socks that I've made for him. I think he has 4 pair. He wears them all the time, and he absolutely adores them. And when someone you love clearly, truly gets a lot of joy out of something that you've made them, it really just makes you want to make them more. So I realized that because I've been doing this sort of, you know, focusing on other projects this year, things for myself and things for the baby, I haven't knit him anything since last year. And I thought, well, then the next pair of socks really need to be for him, because he could use another pair. I have so many, and he only has 4, and he just adores them. So of course I really love and have many plans to make him many more pairs. So I pulled out some of my sock yarn, and asked him what he would like, and he basically was, you know, like that or that or that or that. He didn't have a real specific preference. He liked almost all of the yarn that I showed him. So I decided to pair together a couple of skeins that are left over from other projects that I really, really like together. So the main color is, that's funny, it's what I'm wearing right now. Look at that. That's hilarious. The main color is Wool and Vine Dirty on Purpose on her footsie base, which is a BFL, which is what my Tanya is made out of that I'm wearing right now. Adorable. I had almost a whole skein of this after I made my Tanya. I think I probably just overcompensated, or I don't remember. Anyway, not a problem at all because it's lovely. And I have used it for heels and toes, or just the heels actually, I think on a pair of self-striping socks for him in the past. But I had so much, and it is such a beautiful color that I always thought I really wanted to make a full pair of socks with it. It might be more like a half skein. I don't know. It's like 3/4 of a skein. I only use about a half skein when I make a pair of socks. Even if I don't have contrasting heels, cuffs, and toes, so I knew I had enough, whatever amount it was. But anyway, I knew that this was going to make a lovely pair of socks. In my mind, I really would like to have done something with a cable, but I asked him, you know, because it's lightly variegated. I guess the more I look at it, the more variegated it looks. But I liked the idea of doing something with a cable, but he wasn't sure if he would find that comfortable inside of his shoes or boots, and I certainly didn't want to make him a pair of socks that weren't comfortable. So I will just hold off and make more cable-y socks for myself some other time. So I kept these vanilla, but I wanted to add a bit of contrast to make it interesting, and I chose this, well, he and I together, of course, chose this, which is a leftover club colorway from Woolberry Fiber Co. Gilmore Girls inspired colorway called It's Magical, which is one of her winter snowy Gilmore Girls inspired colorways. I used it in my Sunset Highway sweater, which I guess I made, I think I finished that about a year ago. And I've just had this, you know, maybe like 1/4 of a skein, 1/3 of a skein left. So perfect for heels, cuffs, and toes. It's this kind of, it looks a little bit pinker, but it's kind of a, almost like a burgundy. It's very tonal. It has different levels throughout it. But Ryan really loves like a burgundy color. And I just love these together because I think they create this really nice sort of low contrast combination. If you know about color theory, and you know, probably something a lot of knitters learn from doing stranded color work, is about color volume. And you know the trick where you sort of look at 2 skeins of yarn through a black and white filter on your camera and see, do they look like they're the same shade of gray, because then they won't contrast enough. That's sort of it's called the volume of the color, and it's about how dark or light it is. And here, these would not be good together in color work because they would not contrast enough. If you looked at them through a black and white filter, they would look like the same shade of gray. But the actual hues are extremely different because you have this sort of gray verging on blue shade, and then you have this warmer tone. So the combination for color blocking, like I've done in the sock, is actually a really fun way to get like a subtle combination that looks almost neutral, but ultimately is a fun way to play with color. So if you see 2 colors that you really love together and you want to do them in Colorwork, but you know in the back of your head that it's not going to work because they're not contrasty enough. Think about what you can do with them instead, striping or color blocking or something like that, because I think low contrast, even a brioche, like a two-color brioche project with low contrast, I think can be really, really, really beautiful. So that's my little tip on that. Okay, so I have a couple more things to share. The first thing I did when I left you is get through another chunk of my Daydreamer sweater, which I then decided to set aside to focus on some baby knits, which are the ones I just showed you. And that is because I realized, because this thing is so slow going, it's such a labor of love, which I've talked about in detail in the past. I won't go into detail on the sweater today. I just want to update you on the progress. So if you want more details, you can look at the last couple episodes, or the last episode at least. Anyway, I realized there was no way that I was going to finish this before the baby came, and I figured it made some sense to set it aside just to get in a few more baby knits. In particular, I wanted to use that DK skein that I mentioned, which I put into the dress, and I really wanted to make this sweater because I had discovered that I actually could get the yarn, and like I said, I've been wanting to make this since before I was pregnant. So I set that aside and did those. I do still have some plans for a couple more baby knits as well, but I'm thinking they might be things that would be better to make once she gets here. One is I want to make her a Weasley sweater for Christmas, and I'm going to be making up the pattern, so actually having her in front of me to make sure the fit is perfect, I think would be the easiest thing. And I'd also like to make her a pair of these little eyelet tights, which again, being footed, you kind of want to make sure that the legs are the right length, so I think that would help to actually have her in front of me. So and then I'm sure we'll just continue after that to just make her tons of things for the rest of her life. But those are kind of the things that are on the horizon right now that I thought about knitting before she got here, and then I realized actually it makes more sense to wait until she's here. These ones made sense as knit aheads, and then in the meantime now I've got a couple weeks until I'm due, and instead of coming back to this for a couple weeks only to set it aside again, I think I have decided to just sort of spend a little bit of time still playing hooky a bit from my sweater and knitting a couple of accessories for myself that I'm sort of just have been dying to work on, and I'm going to justify it by saying it's a blamed under knit. So if you don't know, the Knitting Vicariously podcast has a now annual KAL called Blamed Under Knit, which is all about those sort of casting on with reckless abandon, the things that your heart deeply desires, especially now at the holidays when a lot of people feel like they have a lot of obligation knitting. So I will show you my first Blamed Under Knit project in a moment in my whips, and then I'll show you what I'm thinking about knitting next for that as well. But first, let me just catch you up here. I believe I had just done one of the shoulders or part of the shoulder, the front here, and I have done both now, as well as this cool sort of neckline situation, which will then, here's the back. Once I've knit the back up, there will be picking up and kind of doing these like shoulder sections that continue into the sleeves. So really interesting construction on here, and lots more to talk about with the texture of this and the gorgeous Farmer's Daughters Fibers yarn. It is a spectacular sweater that I truly enjoy working on and cannot wait to wear. However, it has dominated my knitting for a couple months now, and with the baby coming, I have just decided that it is reasonable to set it aside briefly, although I still fully plan on finishing it so that I can wear it this year. I did really want to finish it to wear it pregnant because it's a crop top, so it's one of those things I can actually wear with my bump. But round about the beginning of Thanksgiving, the beginning of November, when I was, only this far on it, I kind of looked and did some calculations in my head in terms of how quickly I could knit around in this texture, and realized that even if I knit on it exclusively, I would have to push myself to finish it just in time to have it to wear maybe once or twice before giving birth. And I don't know about you, but for me, the last month of pregnancy is a time when you want to be good to yourself. You don't want to give yourself more jobs and obligations and things to stress out about. So, although I'm sure it would have looked very, very cute with my pregnant belly, especially on Thanksgiving, which is how I pictured myself wearing it, that will just have to stay a fantasy in my mind, and that's okay. That's okay. So, moving along. Before I show you my blamed underknit, which is almost finished, I will show you what I have started for my labor knitting. So I wanted to have something special but mindless that I can work on. I don't know how much I will feel like working on it, between contractions and early labor, or how much I will feel like working on it during downtime in the hospital after giving birth. I just know that labor knitting is a thing, and I'm not crazy. Other knitters do this. So I wanted to have something special that I could look forward to working on. And that would be, it would be mindless, but it wouldn't just be my emergency sock. I kind of wanted something that was labor specific, just as a little treat. So I decided to cast on the Harlow hat, which is a pattern by Andrea Mowry. Show you her picture. You've probably seen this. It's very popular. It's a two-color brioche hat. I love two-color brioche. I have not made many hats. I'm not a big hat knitter. I think mainly because I find getting the right fit to be frustrating. It's in some ways more difficult than getting the right fit on sweaters, especially when you're a person like me who just loves like boxy drop sleeve sweaters, so it's not that hard. Hats can be tricky, and I usually end up just sort of wearing the same couple hats all the time anyway. So I'm not a big hat knitter, but I love me some two-color brioche, and this I knew would be the perfect sort of like mindless but still fun project, because it's just two-color brioche and you just go, go, go on it. And also, I have had these lovely contrasting skeins sitting waiting for projects since I bought them when we went to Portugal in January at Retrosaria. So many people are familiar with her Mondim base, which I finished those socks out of. I mentioned that. I'm actually also using her Mondim base for my blamed underknit project, which I'll show you in a second. This is her soft Donegal base. So it is also fingering, but as you can see, it is a single ply. And so it has sort of the same kind of rustic texture that you expect from Retrosaria. A little bit softer because it's a single ply. That's the nature of a single ply. But what's really cool is it has this sort of dyed in the wool, heathered quality to it. You can see all the beautiful little colors that are spun together in there, which is an effect you get by dyeing the wool before spinning versus spinning and then dyeing the yarn. And this one is just a natural to complement it. When I purchased them, I fell in love with this, and I thought it might be fun to do something colorwork, so I grabbed something that would contrast with it. But I didn't really have a pattern in mind, which is pretty unlike me to buy yarn without a pattern in mind, but you know, I was at Retro Zaria, so I just kind of went wild. And I never really found something I was super excited for. And then when I decided I wanted to do the Harlow hat for labor, and I realized that I had that the yarn weight and the yardage would work out to use these for it, I just thought, oh, it's like perfect. So excited. So I love when that happens because I don't like having yarn and knitting projects that you pick primarily because they work with the yarn that you have, but you're not actually that excited about that project. That's like the main reason why I don't just stash up a bunch of yarn, because I need to be excited about the pattern. It's not enough for me to just be excited about the yarn and pick something that works. You know, sometimes it works out, like here where I had this yarn that I needed to use and I found a pattern for it. But often what happens is the yarn just sits in my stash and I never really find a pattern that I'm excited enough about. So for me, the pattern usually comes first and the yarn second. Or I know what yarn I want to use and then I pick a pattern and then I pick the quantity of the yarn based on that, you know, because there's that aspect as well. Sometimes you buy yarn and you find a pattern that's perfect for it, except you don't have the right yardage or whatever. Anyway, allow me to explain why so much of this has been knit already. It's because you're supposed to knit the first 3 inches on a smaller needle and then switch to a larger gauge needle, which I assume, you know, makes it fit a little bit better, more snug around the brim. And the smaller needle that I had was a, I think it was like a size 1. Anyway, I was knitting magic loop, and knitting something this big, magic loop, it's not my favorite. Knitting brioche magic loop is not my favorite. It was just a little uncomfortable and not what I wanted to be my special, mindless, fun labor knitting. So I decided I needed to get through that part and get it onto a circular to be my nice, fun labor knitting. Now, hopefully this will still be fun, because what I did for the shorter needle circumference, I don't have really the right, so this is a fixed needle. I keep trying to start this sentence and I don't know how to do it. Hang on. I did almost everything with my interchangeable Chow Goose set. I absolutely love it. I love the red cable. I love the metal tips. I love using interchangeables for everything. It makes life really simple. As I mentioned, I'm not a big hat knitter. The thing about hats is you kind of need a pretty small circumference. You can achieve that with some slightly longer double points, which I don't have a great collection of good quality double points. You can achieve that with a nice little circular, which of course I do have a couple really short cables in my interchangeable set, but my tips are all the slightly longer tips. And when you put the really short hat cable with the slightly longer tips, it isn't really a circle. It becomes this like messy, uncomfortable triangle because the tips are really too long for the cable, and it's just fiddly and uncomfortable. So I thought, let me just go ahead and order myself a fixed cable, and that way it will have shorter tips and just work better. I could have, of course, just ordered some shorter tips to use with my interchangeable cable, but I also was wanting to try out the Luca needles because they're just so pretty and everyone raves about them. So that's what I have here. They are beautiful. They are soft. They are lovely. I'm not 100% sold right now, and that is because, A, as I mentioned, I almost exclusively knit with metal needles, and so the driftwood is just, it feels a bit sticky to me. It feels a bit slow. It's just not what I'm used to. Possibly that's the combination of it with the rustic yarn. If I were knitting a really silky yarn like an alpaca or something with a silk blend, or even just something more like a superwash that was sliding along these, it might be a better yarn needle material match. But also, and I'm wondering if this isn't one of the reasons why I don't knit hats more, but the way I knit, like the longer needle tips are a lot more comfortable in my hands. I've never liked the short little like 9-inch needles for socks or anything like that. I really like to have something I can hold on to, and here, as you can tell, like I hold the knitting with my whole hands. I'm not used to sort of just doing this, and when you do that here, the actual needle tip is stopping around here, and the rest of my hand is just holding onto the cable. And then the cable is kind of straining because it's such a short circumference. So that in combination with the wood and the sticky yarn is just making the whole thing not as effortless as I had expected, which is okay. It's not unenjoyable. I'm not going to go buy another needle just so that I can have metal tips. It's really just kind of slowing me down a little bit, and I think that's fine. I'm still enjoying it enough that I like that this is my labor knitting. So what are you going to do? I'll show you these colors look like in the brioche up close a little bit. So as you can tell, it is quite beautiful. And this is a truly reversible hat. The way she does the decreases looks cute on both sides. It does look different on both sides, and the what is technically the inside is the look I like the most. So I'm knitting this with the darker color on the inside, and that is the shade I will probably wear out most, if not all of the time. And what else is there to say? Oh, this started with this two-color tubular cast on, which Andrea Mowry has a tutorial for. It is just like her classic long tail tubular cast on, which is my favorite tubular cast on. It is so easy compared to others, so fast. I absolutely love it. It's actually become memorizable at this point, which is insane. Like, I have tubular cast-ons and bind-offs memorized at the moment. Maybe that will go out of my brain, especially like when I start breastfeeding and this all becomes sludge even more than it is right now. But the fact that I can do a tubular cast-on and bind-off without watching a YouTube video has greatly improved the quality of my life. So thank you, Andrea Mowry, for that and so many other things. But this is done with two colors, which is really cool. There is the fact that you kind of have to carry the color on the inside so you can sort of see where it, I don't know if you can see where it sort of runs along in there. So it's not like it's absolutely perfect columns there at the bottom. You can see the, like the white yarn running inside the stitches, right? And that's not because I did anything wrong. It's as hidden as it really can be. You have the same with the red on this side. Because it can never be like a true just columns, because the yarn really has to make it all the way around. But it is mainly hidden, and it is the really the cleanest edge for a two-color brioche that you can imagine. The alternative would be that your cast-on would be all in one color. So the fact that the cast-on does really alternate and do that perfect fold over like tubular edge is just very impressive to me. So Andrea Mowry, by the way, also designed this sweater. If I didn't mention that, she is brilliant. Like, She's one of those designers where her ideas and her aesthetic are so good that I think she would be popular even if she didn't also write really clear, brilliant patterns. But she's also just so intelligent about knitting. She just really understands it, and you can tell that she's still challenging herself, and with all of her designs, she's always trying to learn a new skill and teach you a new skill and do things in the best way that they could possibly be done. And I respect that so much, and like it really makes it enjoyable to knit her patterns. I've always liked her, but like with the last few patterns of hers that I've done, I've become just so just like a total cult follower. Like I will follow her to the edge of the earth at this point. So I know it's a really, really, really original opinion. Hot take on Andrew Mowry. I know I'm not the only person who feels this way, but it is very true. She is incredible. Okay, final thing to show you is my project I'm currently working on. I'm about to finish. I have been wanting to make these Underwing mitts for the longest time. Let me put this one on to show you. I mean, this is another very popular pattern. They are so lovely. Oh my gosh. Look at that. So beautiful. You have these phases of the moon here, and the moth, and what almost reminds me of like a key with these circles. It almost looks like, and that's not what it is, but they just have this like classic, sort of Victorian, almost Gothic kind of lovely quality, but they're still sort of minimal, especially when you do it in neutral colors. They're not flashy or out there. It's just, I just think these are so beautiful and I've wanted them for the longest time. I've never knit them before for a number of reasons. Primarily, I'm not a great colorwork knitter, or at least I don't think of myself as one. I'm not great with tensioning yarn in general, and that makes colorwork more difficult because I'm still on the long road of recovery from teaching myself to knit, and so I hold the yarn really weird, and I've talked about this a lot before, and I really have it on my to-do list to like sit down and practice proper picking tensioning, which I know would improve my comfort level and my speed and my tension with color work and all kinds of things. But it's really a chore to do because I have to sit down, probably knit on just a swatch so that I don't completely ruin a project with a gauge that's all over the place, and just really like do it. And I don't know, maybe I'll find time for that on maternity leave. I bet right before people go on maternity leave, they think they're going to find time for all kinds of things, and ultimately, turns out it's not a vacation. It is the bare minimum that you need to recover from giving birth while also raising an infant. So I assume probably I will not have extra time to do anything on maternity leave. But in my mind right now, I'm imagining that possibly that's when I'm actually going to sit down and practice picking. Long story short, I'm not a very confident colorwork knitter, and I had a couple years ago started the OWL mittens, which is a beautiful colorwork pattern that has owls and trees on one side and then Harry Potter spells written on the other. And I just really lost steam on it. It was a total chore to knit for me. And I was worried these would be like that too. I really wanted the product, but I was worried that the process would not be fun. And with the OWL mittens, I really wanted the product, but not badly enough, and I ultimately ripped them out. Now, I will say my knitting skill has improved considerably since then. I think that was maybe 3 years ago. I've knit a lot more colorwork since then. That might be that's probably a huge part of why this was more fun and I didn't lose steam. Another big part of it, though, I believe, is that the pattern is a little bit more regular. On this side, it has this sort of repeating pattern. And then even over here, you have these sections of the sort of checkerboard. And ultimately, what you're knitting on any given row is symmetrical. So once you get to the center, you kind of then knit the same thing on the other side. With the OWL mittens, they weren't symmetrical. It was this scene of owls on trees that was asymmetrical, and then the back side was writing, and so that was also asymmetrical and not any kind of repetition. So any given line of knitting, there was a lot more of having to be like 7, now 2, now 3, now 2, now 4, now 1 with each color. Whereas here, you know, when you're on this side, it's something really simple where it's just like 4, 2, 1, 2, 4, 2, 1, 2. And you start to be able to just look at your knitting and read it and not even think about the numbers and just sort of like see what it's obviously the pattern. And over here, once you get to the center, you're repeating the same thing on the other side. So that makes it a simpler equation of what any given row looks like. And for me, I think that made it a lot more enjoyable to knit because I was able to knit these while also watching a podcast or listening to an audiobook or watching television. And instead of spending the whole time with just my mind locked on numbers and then, you know, having to double check them to make sure that I hadn't screwed something up. So these are still a bit of a challenge, and they were certainly, you know, challenging enough to be fun, but not like torture, which is kind of how I felt before. I still would like to pick up the OWL mittens sometime because I think now that I'm a better knitter, they would probably not be as torturous. But in the meantime, it's just opening up my eyes to how I can probably do more of the fun colorwork mitts and mittens that I've marked as favorites and not be tortured by them, because a lot of them actually are more symmetrical and with repeating patterns and stuff like these. And so I know they'll be more fun to do than the OWLs. I am now almost finished. This mitt, you can see, does not have the underwing yet. That is because it is duplicate stitch. And aren't you impressed by how good it looks? Because you guys know, you just saw how bad I am at duplicate stitch. I feel like I had a little bit of a breakthrough here, which is like getting the tension to be loose enough and really puffing up those stitches on the outside. It means that it takes a little bit longer than you kind of think it should, because it's not just in, out, in, out. It's like you sort of make your stitch and then you kind of adjust the tension and make sure it's sitting exactly how you want it to. But if you take the time to do that, ultimately it pays off. Look at that. It looks as if it's just part of the knitting. So pretty proud of that. I still hate duplicate stitch. I still would always prefer to do intarsia or 3-color colorwork. And I was going to alter the pattern to do that, but the issue is that really the way that it's just this little bit, it would have required 4 different tiny little bits of intarsia yarn, which would have been a lot of ends to weave in. And if I did the 3-color colorwork, because there's nothing on this side, I would have to have carried and caught the floats for this color across more than half of the project, which I could have done, but ultimately I was just trying to avoid the duplicate stitch because I hate duplicate stitch, and the you know, process of carrying all of those floats for a 3rd color would have probably been just as miserable as doing duplicate stitch. And I really wanted the opportunity to practice the duplicate stitch again, because I hate when there's a technique that I'm crappy at. It just makes me want to get better at it, which is probably why I've been doing so much color work lately. um, I'm like stubborn in that way. If I'm not good at something, I want to improve because I'm not the kind of person who just accepts that I'm not going to be good at something. I feel like I should be able to be good at everything except sports, but you know, knitting related. So ultimately, I think I made the right call because I was able to improve and learn a bit more about why my duplicate stitch sucks and how I can make it better, and I love how they look. So the second one still needs the duplicate stitch, and it still needs the little bit of ribbing on the thumb. I have it on a stitch holder right now, so I just need to pick up and do that. And I will do both of those things, and oh, I already wove in the ends. Yeah, I'm going to do both of those things later today, and then we will be finished. And I am going to block them, of course, because I don't know if you can see on camera, but as with any color work, they're just a little nubbly, a little uneven, and the blocking will help. I'm very pleased with the fit. They fit absolutely perfectly, which is sheer luck because I did not swatch. I did not feel like swatching, and I thought, you know, if they're a little tight or a little loose, they'll still probably be okay. I did make a pretty educated guess just based on other projects that I have made and what I know about my own tension, how it compares, how I usually have to size down needles, but with color work I usually have to size up. And all of that, I think, brought me to using the same size needle that was in the pattern, which was like a 1, I want to say. But yeah, ultimately, I did look at all the measurements and look at the gauges I've knit on other projects in the past and make a pretty educated guess. So it wasn't like I just wildly cast on with a needle randomly and got the perfect size, but I certainly wasn't going to swatch because when you do a project like this, I feel like this is your swatch. Like I started to knit it and then I sort of put my hand in there and went, yep, that's the right size. So it's really just a time saver, honestly. I've become less and less of a swatcher. I suppose I'm probably due for a major swatching nightmare that will get me back into my swatching ways, but lately I've been living on a prayer and it's working. So yeah, love the fit, need to block them. The other thing, you may notice how where the duplicate stitch goes, I kept it the darker color, and that is what's suggested in the pattern, and that helps the duplicate stitch to, you know, look proper, because you can imagine if I had done these sections with the cream color, it would have been easier to find where they were when it came time for the duplicate stitch, but there would probably be some cream showing through, and you don't want that. So it's worth doing it in the dark gray and then just counting, and you know, you're knitting and looking at the chart to figure out where they go. It wasn't that difficult, and definitely recommend that because I do think some of the cream would be showing through just because duplicate stitch is never going to be perfect enough. So having some dark gray show through, you don't notice it because that's the background anyway, if that makes sense. Other thing to talk about, oh, color dominance. So if you are a really, really skilled colorwork knitter, you can knit with equal tension on both strands of yarn. I am not. So I have to worry about color dominance, which essentially means that the color that is being carried underneath the other color is going to be a bit of a looser tension, and those stitches are all going to be a little bit bigger, and therefore they are going to push into the foreground. And the way to deal with that is just to notice it and manage it and make good choices about which color is dominant. You know that one of them is going to be, so you have to make those choices. So at the bottom, I had my cream dominant because the moons are on a background of the darker shade, so I held that underneath. And then when I got here, I realized, oh, I'm gonna need to switch that. Hey honey, Yeah. We're washing his food bowl right now. It's in the dishwasher, so he's really upset because he's like, there's no food in there and there never will be ever again. I'm starving. But he just ate. Okay, so then I got here, I had the lighter color dominant, and I realized that of course, the moth needs to stand out on the light background. So now I need to switch. So when I got past the moons, I think it was, so I was on this one, obviously this is my first one. I think I actually got all the way up to here before that sort of dawned on me when the moth started. And so what I did was I switched at that point, and then right here, the tail of the moth, I think was shrinking back a little bit because these dark stitches were smaller because they were tighter than the white background. And I just went in with like my knitting needle, or you can use a darning needle, and just kind of loop, I know, just kind of loop underneath both legs and pull on it a little. And that really helps a lot. So I did that to kind of get that tail to stick out more, and then I switched the color dominance at that point, and I think they look great. I did keep the cream as the dominant color on the palm because, again, I wanted these circles to stand out on the dark background, and also because I'd already done part of them, and I certainly didn't want the color dominance to switch in the middle of that pattern because I think you would have been able to see it. But regardless of that, I did want the cream to be the dominant color anyway. And so what I did was, on this side, I knit these magic loop. And so when I would come to this side, I would just move them so that the dark color was the lower one. And then every time I got to this side, I would just cross them over again. And I think it worked perfectly. I think I'm really, really pleased. And I'm glad that I took the time to sort of change that up depending on which part of the pattern I was on. It made it for one more thing to think about, but it was worth it. And you know, sometimes one more thing to think about isn't a chore. It's like part of the fun of the game. So that was kind of how I felt about it. Yeah. Then on this one, I just went ahead and switched the dominance once I got past the moons because I remembered and knew that I needed to. And of course kept it on this side. And yeah, there are tiny little spots where the dominance will still be a bit of a problem. So like here, there's these two tiny little white stitches, cream colored stitches. And they shrink back because the cream is the background, and so I was knitting with the darker color as the dominant color. And I've gone in there a few times, and I'll probably do it again when it's damp from the blocking, and I've just done this again through both legs and just sort of tug at it. And you can see right there, it brings it out a little bit more. And I think doing it once more when it is damp will help as well. This is the kind of thing that really can't be helped unless you have more control over your tensioning when you're knitting it. And you know, if you are knitting and you notice that that's going to be the case, you're doing this row where you have these two tiny white spaces and you're knitting with your darker color dominant, you can sort of in the moment sort of intentionally make those stitches a little bit looser, and then that'll help. I didn't do that. But that's something I want to keep in mind in the future, because sometimes on a given row there will be a couple colors that are your background color, but really just for that moment you want that one stitch to be more dominant so that it doesn't disappear. That would be important for any kind of little accent, and usually the accents, like these tiny little fleece stitches, are already in your dominant color, but sometimes they're not. Like, you know, along here where you have the eyelet look with the dark. So, and as I went, I did often kind of make those these dark stitches a little bit looser just to make sure they were showing up. I kind of tugged on them a little and stuff as I went. Another interesting thing about how this is designed is that there are more stitches on the back of the hand than on the palm. The way that I knit it in Magic Loop, I still kept that as the breakdown, so the palm was on one needle and the back was on the other needle. The difference isn't enough that it made it unwieldy to do Magic Loop, but it does just make the fit a little bit better because you have more space here, and so you need more fabric to curve over the top of your hand, and then your palm is more concave. So really great detail in the pattern there. These are written to be gorgeous, fun to knit, and well-fitting, so absolutely recommend this pattern. And then I also did the tubular cast on, the long tail tubular cast on, and the sewn tubular bind off, both here and here, to give it that special little finish, which I love. Those did not come in the pattern. Those are just my favorite cast-ons and bind-offs. If you look them up, long tail tubular cast-on, especially Andrea Mallory's tutorial, and a sewn tubular bind-off, you can find tutorials for both of those. Those are my preferred ways to do tubular cast on and bind off, but there are many, many different ways, and various people have different ones that they prefer for different reasons. I will say the long tail cast on, which I absolutely love, you definitely need to be good at reading your knitting or it will be frustrating. There are other long tail cast ons, other tubular cast ons that have more steps and take a bit more time. That would be easier for a more beginner knitter and less frustrating ultimately. So keep that in mind. If you try this and it makes you crazy, like, we all have our preferences, so it's fine. Like, it's my favorite, it doesn't have to be your favorite. But that would be my recommendation. If you are an experienced knitter to where you can really look at how the yarn is lining up on the needle and sort of tell what's going on and where is a purl is the beginning of what's going to be a purl and a knit as you're sort of crafting this tube, then it's faster and easier and really great. But if you kind of need everything to be really simple and laid out for you, and you don't feel super comfortable about understanding the kind of like actual architecture of every stitch, there are other tubular cast on tutorials that would be better, so don't necessarily give up on the idea of a tubular cast on if you try this one and it's too confusing. There's others out there. So the whole idea with tubular, if you don't know, is that it basically creates like a double layer of knitting briefly that then gets grafted sort of back together. So with the bind off, it becomes a graft, and with the cast on, it sort of starts from that graft and from two sides coming together, which is the tube there in the tubular. And what that does is it creates that nice little invisible edge. However, because it is double, it can also make it a little bit chunky. And so you can see, especially for the cast on, I find it's easier to keep the bind off how I like it, but the cast on is not perfect because, for one thing, I did the cast on and then I went into twisted rib. And now that I've done this cast on enough times, I think I know how I would actually do it as a twisted rib tubular cast on, so that that first row would be twisted as well. And I think that would help make it tighter and more in line with where the ribbing goes after the cast on edge. But yeah, you can just sort of see how this cast on edge is just a bit bigger and looser than the ribbing itself. And that is in part because it's not a twisted rib and in part because it's double thick. But the more I do it, the cleaner and the better they look. So I really like practicing that skill, and Yeah, I just love the way it looks. On something like my hand, on something that's so detailed and beautiful, I really wanted uh, that nice finish instead of having the ridge of the cast on and bind off edge. So I think it's worth the extra effort. And then the yarn here, which I guess I still haven't mentioned, is Retrosaria. The cream is just her regular, I think it's undyed. And then the other two shades are from La Bien-Aimée, dyeing on the Retrosaria base. And this is the contrast one here. I've only used a couple yards of it, so I still have it skeined up. But yeah, you can see La Bien-Aimé's logo next to Retrosaria. And this one is caramel, and the dark gray is ash. So it's really, really been the perfect base for Colorwork. I am totally sold on London as a Colorwork base. It just creates such a dense, warm, woolly fabric with, you know, no gaps or spaces to see through. Very, very pleased with these. So, gonna finish that today, and then I do have plans. Here? Yeah, I do have plans for another selfish knit in the 2 weeks I have left before baby, and that is for the Urban Jungle hat, which I actually saw on the Knitting Vicariously podcast, so I think it's quite appropriate that I blamed Underknit for that one. It is a Colorwork leopard print hat made out of DK, held with a lace weight knit mohair, and I have some, I purchased this Capra for it from Knit Picks. I absolutely love this base. It is really soft. It's 15% cashmere, and the rest is merino wool. It is a superwash, I believe. I mean, like, obviously the cashmere isn't, but it's just a really nice base, especially for more of an affordable base. It's probably my favorite Knit Picks base that I've had experience with. And this is the Tansy Heather, just a little bit more yellow than I was hoping. I was hoping it might be dulled down a little bit, but I have some black Capra in my stash that I can use as the contrast. And then I just picked up some of their mohair to hold stranded with the black Capra. They did not have any mohair in a neutral shade, so I was thinking I might just strand the mohair with the black for the spots and then have the background not have mohair, which I think could be an interesting look. However, since this is a little more orangey than I wanted it to be, I also kind of thought, well, maybe I could use mohair to kind of dull down the color if I found sort of a dirtier shade. But now I'm about to finish the mitts and kind of just ready to cast it on, so I might just do it as it is. I don't know, that looks leopardy enough, right? It's not like Halloween. It's more, looks more like a neutral, like a tan color. It's just a little bit orange, but yeah, I can't decide. I don't want to go to the yarn store, which I know sounds crazy, but like, I don't want to leave my house right now. I'm tired and it's cold and I'm 9 months pregnant, so I don't want to schlep to a brick and mortar store to buy some mohair to hold with this to dull down the color. I just don't. So I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Remains to be seen how lazy I am about that. It's weird how you can be lazy about something like that when you're knitting something from scratch, which is like the least lazy thing. It takes so much effort and so much time, but it's fun. let's see. Yeah, so I feel like I have been going on, and this is a bit of a long episode, but obviously I did have a lot of things to share with you. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in December for Vlogmas. Thanks for watching.